In 2012, I became an entrepreneur, a business owner. But before that, I was a corporate lawyer. I had worked in private practice and then went to work for a development finance institution, and then lastly moved to work for one of Africa's biggest manufacturing conglomerates, the Dangote Group. And in the early days, when I had moved to Lagos, I was going to a meeting with my then boss, the CEO of Dangote Cement, Tony Hadley. And we were stuck in traffic in the Lagos Go Slow. And I remember people knocking on the windows asking for money. And I turned to them and I said, "Ask the white guy." And Tony heard this and he laughed and he laughed and he said, "Monica, this is Nigeria. White people work for black people." And at the time when he said that to me, it didn't really sink in. I mean, I kind of thought, oh, that's interesting, but it didn't really sink in. It was only later, when I had gone for a meeting with Aliko Dangote to Zambia to work on opening the cement plant there, after a series of meetings, he turned around and said to me, "Where are your people, Monica? We've been coming here for years. Where are the Zambian banks, the Zambian insurance companies, the Zambian suppliers?" And that's when it hit me. He wasn't saying anything new, anything I didn't know, because I had lived in Zambia before, and I knew that actually Zambia was run by the Muzungus. It was just what was done. But this time, it actually affected me, because I was living in Nigeria and seeing that Nigerians run their economy. In Zambia, we are just spectators in our economy, and we were happy to do that. So I began to think about it. Why were we spectators? Why were we not active participants in our economy? And began to challenge myself, if not you, then why not me? And I gave myself sort of 3 goals or my vision as to why, if I was going to do something, what I was going to do. And I knew anything I wanted to do, first of all, had to have impact. I wanted to be part of that group of Zambians who was going to transform my country, where we would then take some form of economic leadership and change the way things were done. I knew I wanted to do that. The second thing I wanted to do was to create a Zambian brand, a brand which Zambians would be proud of, to call their own, that they would stand behind, similar to the way Nigerians love and hold dear Dangote, or the same way South Africans stand behind MTN. What did Zambians stand behind? We hadn't thought about that. But that's what I wanted to do. And the third thing I wanted to do was to make some money. I mean, there's no way you can work with the world's richest black man and not think about cash. And so I thought, this is a great idea. Maybe let me try and do this. Let me go home and try to create something and build something. And so I went back to Alaji and I said, you know, it's what I'm thinking of. And there was a negotiation, because I think when he said it, he wasn't trying to get me thinking. He was just remarking on a fact. So after some negotiation and intervention from friends, I finally got the blessing and I left. I left Nigeria, I left a comfortable job, and I went home after being away for almost 13 years. So then I started Java Foods. And our first product was an instant noodle brand. Obviously, I was living in Nigeria, and Indomie was huge. And there was nothing in Zambia, so why not an instant noodle brand, right? And it was really interesting because it was like a baptism by fire. Everything I could have never thought of happened. It was hard. It was the hardest thing I could have thought of. I was a lawyer after all, had not lived in Zambia, knew nothing about manufacturing, fast-moving consumer goods, market, nothing. It was hard. We had small crises on some days. A small crisis was when the salesmen were stopped by policemen to ask for money because the tire was faulty, the lights didn't work. To big crisis when our stock was stuck at the border for 3 weeks, or when they wouldn't pay you, and then you had to pay salaries and suppliers. Big crises. And this is when it dawned on me that this stuff is not easy. So maybe these guys, there's something about it that keeps you behind a desk working for somebody else. But we kept on. After all, I'd made the plunge and convinced people that this was the right thing to do. And so I want to talk about some of the challenges we went through, because they're really they're not unique. Anyone who's going to embark on this journey will probably have a bit of this, with sprinklings of the Africa factor, as I call it. And the first one I want to talk about is what I call the Zambiana factor. And this is the one when people talk about you, or what they tell you, or what they say about you, about why you're doing this. And the first one I heard when I first started the business was, she had to have been fired. I mean, how is it possible that she, at that level, would come back and sit in a warehouse and sell noodles? Why? Something must have happened in Nigeria. The second one was a little more interesting, was that they would look at you and sort of say, like I hadn't thought this through. There must be another issue around it. And then the worst thing is, remember, Zambia was the Muzungu country. Because I would pass my card out and it said Java Foods, people would look at it and say, never heard of it. And then not invite you to networking events, not allow you to be part of what was now the upcoming middle-class community and business private sector, because you didn't have a big company behind you. I had left Dangote, and therefore I had no connection, and therefore I was not useful to anyone in Zambia. And that was really hard, coming from where I came from at such a high level to almost crash landing in my own country. You know, some of the things you don't think about, and then they strike you in the face. Another one was the fact that no one really took me seriously. You know, and I say this lightly, because I had a few comments, and I thought, it's clearly because they don't take me seriously. Like when you meet someone and they say, oh, you make eeZee noodles. Do you make them in your kitchen? I mean, clearly she's having a laugh, because she can't be serious. Or more recently, when I was getting off a plane and I met a Zambian, and he was like, oh, what do you do? I said, oh, I'm in food processing. And then he said, so where's your restaurant? No joke, it's a true story. And the reality is because, one, there are not a lot of women who do this, and therefore they cannot fathom the thought that that is exactly what I do. That it had to be a restaurant, it had to be a cottage industry in a kitchen is what I had to do. I couldn't actually have a factory, a line, and have people and distribution. It's just impossible. And the issue is that the critical mass is not there. And that was the reality in Zambia. There are very few of us, very few Zambians that look like me doing this kind of thing. So for them, you can't even be angry, because they just don't see it. The second point was access to market. It seems pretty easy, you know, have a product and sell it. But in a country which is very close to South Africa and dominated by South African brands, South African supermarkets, it's actually a little bit more complicated. The South African supermarkets come with their own prejudices, and they come with their own products. And therefore, when we first started, we thought, of course we'll get into the supermarket. We've done everything right. Barcode, packaging, health, we did everything. It wasn't easy. It took us 5 months to get our first listing, and even after the listing, we were at the back of the shelf, we couldn't get the shelf space, and then asked me about getting paid. Good luck. I remember one time speaking to one of the buyers, because you have to speak to the buyer to get your stock on the shelf, and she was filling our information into the computer. And she said, Java Foods, franchisor. I said, there isn't one. I said, owner. I said, I'm the owner. And she looked up and she says, is it? Because she couldn't imagine it. And after I left, one of the people in the office said, well, you have to understand, Zambian suppliers, we list them, then 3 months later, we never see them again. So she really doesn't want to waste her time. What could I say to that? These are the stories we have to go through. Or when you have to deal with the Asian wholesaler who sells to the mass market, and then he asks my drivers, which Indian family is behind it? The reality. The good news is that things are slowly changing, and that government has now realized 20 years later that you can no longer have formal retail or retail full of foreign products. That if you do not actively ask supermarkets to stock Zambian products, you will get none. And therefore now the opportunity is opening up for Zambian suppliers to take advantage of this, to put their goods on the shelf. So we can no longer blame the supermarket, but we have to look at ourselves to take up the opportunity. The third one I want to talk about is financing. And actually everybody talks about how painful financing is. Last week I was in South Africa and I had lunch with some friends of mine, and I said to them, 2015 has to be the hardest year of my entrepreneurial journey. We had some money when we first started, we had a bit of money the second year, the third year we had no money. And worse still, the economy began to soften because of the commodity prices, which meant that people were buying less, and which meant that every time I sold, I panicked because the dollar moved, which meant that the kwacha is the Grinch that stole Christmas. It is becoming much more harder for local companies to continue to operate, and even harder if you have to borrow at 30 to 40%. You're dead in the water. And therefore, you really have to be fast on your feet and innovative about how you raise financing to continue to operate, to continue to pay salaries, to continue to make sure your brand is out there. And it takes a lot of work, a lot of perseverance, a lot of leveraging your networks, because it's not an obvious thing where you'll get money. We have been told so many times, your project is too small, the risks are too high. What does she know about fast-moving consumer goods? She'll never succeed. She's just making the market for a multinational. Everything, which actually is a legitimate concern and really painful to hear. But we've continued to go on, and the great news is that eeZee Noodles, in a short 3-year period, is a leading Zambian brand. And one thing I want to say about it is a leading Zambian brand, not because the Mzungu buy it, because they don't. They buy their own brands, because Zambians buy it. And they stand behind it. And that is why I'm still able to stand here today. So I thank the Zambians who do. So, I think I would like to leave here with a few things to say that I want to encourage people, that things don't change for our continent if we sit here and we believe that we're going to look for jobs, that we really have to be part of what we want to see, the difference, to take up the challenge and start something. It is definitely not easy. There will be a lot of obstacles, and there will be challenges, but it's definitely going to be worth it. And then, so I will take you even back to my 3 points. Did I create impact? Most definitely. Today, a lot of women, a lot of young men and women now see that it's possible, that there's nothing stopping them except themselves to take up the opportunity. The second one we've just talked about eeZee being a leading brand. It's amazing how it's changed everything and how other people are now creating brands in a lot of other sectors. The third one about making money, well, we're still on that one. We've still got a little way to go on that one. And so I think I would like to leave here with one question. Do you want to be a spectator or participant in the growth of your continent? Thank you.